Hi, this is Jen Rubin, Editor-in-Chief of The Contrarian. I am thrilled to have with us Paul Raushenbush. He is the CEO and President of the Interfaith Alliance. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. I am a fan of the show and a fan of yours, so great to be here.
Thank you. What is the Interfaith Alliance?
Interfaith Alliance is about 32 years old now. It was started actually specifically to counteract what was viewed as the outsized influence and voice of the Christian coalition. People like Ralph Reed, people like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, who were kind of claiming the mic of religion in America. And this was a group of, kind of liberal, moderate Jews, Protestants, Catholics who were saying, actually, you don't represent religion for America. We have a robust tradition that looks nothing like you, and yet you're taking up all the airspace. And so it's been 30 years of really, promoting other ways of understanding how religion can work side by side with no one religion being able to dominate others. For instance, Christians don't actually have more rights than anyone else in this country, although you wouldn't know that by this administration. So we've been doing this for a long time. Walter Cronkite was an honorary chair for about 15 years. We've really tried to have a sane voice that represents the true calling of America, which is freedom of religion and non-establishment of religion. Does that sound familiar? First Amendment, and that's what we really promote. And so right now we see that very much under attack. And so yeah,
Absolutely.
we are working in this moment as hard as we can to do as much as we can.
It has been rare that the interfaith community, the Alliance in particular, has been so present, so powerful, so front and center on an issue as it has been on the ICE immigration issue. What about this moment do you think has crystallized Christians, Jews, Muslims to come together in such a spiritual way, a faith-based way?
I would say ICE has done that, but there's been a lot of work that has come before that in order to allow us to say, oh, wow, okay, this is really outrageous. But if we just look at the past year, Jen, the incredible way the faith communities have shown up in No Kings. If you went to a No Kings rally, you saw religious signs there. People
Yes.
were like, this does not represent the America we want. We're all going to show up. A lot of organizing has been done. And ICE, I think in particular, because there is such a mandate to against cruelty, against pure targeting of our neighbors. And in many of our traditions, I think, the idea of treating the stranger with respect, welcoming the stranger, loving our neighbor, these are fundamental mandates. And no matter how you understand the broader immigration conversation and the fact that we had actually an immigration bill that was very conservative that Trump killed. It's just good to remember
Yes.
that right before the election wasn't a winner for him to have actually that resolved. And now here we are, and we're seeing what can only be described as a kind of attack on non-Christian and non-white peoples. Like literally, they've asked for permission to racially profile, and were given it by the Supreme Court. And all of that together has really exercised these different religious communities who are saying, no, not on our watch. This does not feel right. It does not feel good. And especially the cruelty that is involved with it has really, created incredible response from religious communities, really literally across the religious landscape. And that is very exciting. And it gives me great hope.
Absolutely. One of the major forces has been Pope Leo, who has been so strong on immigration, but also on, frankly, on American foreign policy. We just had three of the top archbishops come out and denounce a policy that amounts to imperialism. How important has the Pope's role been, and how activating rather, has that been for American Catholics?
Well, what was interesting, again, like one of the most surprising things was the unforced error. Like within the first month of this administration, J.D. Vance attacking the Catholic bishops. I mean, if you were trying to do something wrong, that would be it. Because the Catholics are generally try to walk the line here. Some are more progressive, some are very conservative. The Catholic Church is split. But if you go after the Catholic Church and the bishops and say you're literally accusing them of mishandling funds, they're saying you're padding the bottom line. This is the vice president attacking the bishops. So already you're like, okay, And then the Catholic charities have been gone. They've gone after Catholic charities. They've attacked everyone who's been working on anything with immigration. And it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And then you have the elevation of a Chicago born pope who has experience abroad. And this is on the heels of Pope Francis. Now, Pope Leo, by all that I have ascertained, is not someone who wants to be known as a firebrand, not someone who really wants to be like kind of out there known as an activist pope. But he is just following the mandates of his faith and actually speaking very clearly and saying, do more to his bishops. And he's been urging them on. And they have been, they did this public announcement, PSA, about immigration. And it was crazy to see the diversity and the power that spoke up essentially negating the policy of President Trump and the people behind him. And then, recently, yes, they've just said this is insane. This is a kind of violence. It's a foreign policy driven by violence, driven by war as a first resort, rather than as something that has to be very carefully described through the just war, which is a Catholic ideal. And so what we're really seeing here is I think at least the Catholic hierarchy and many of the priests on the ground are saying this does not represent us. Now, we may agree on some issues, like, abortion still, but even there, Trump's never been anti-abortion, really. He's just used it. So I think we're seeing maybe a realignment with the Catholic Church, at least on these issues. And here's the other thing, like Catholic priests have shown up to detention centers saying we need to be able to give communion. This is a religious right, and they have been denied and denied and denied. And so this is brings us to another issue. What does religious freedom really mean in this era of Trump 2.0? When religious freedom is denied and denied, aside from to the small cadre of Trump religious supporters. And aside from that, everyone else is fair game. And today, as we're talking, we're coming up on the anniversary of when Bishop Buddy just asked from her pulpit, which she's allowed to do, she asked for mercy for the immigrant community and for trans youth and LGBTQ youth. And she got attacked for it terribly, terribly, censored and apology and really grave. Religious freedom means nothing unless you're on their team. And so, now she's Episcopal, but still, like it has been really heartening and to see the way that Pope Leo is operating. And again, not from a place of someone who's wild or he is very level-setted, which means this has to be understood as an essential understanding of what Catholicism is. He's not out in front on this. This is central, and so that's really important.
Absolutely. Reverend Buddy was one of my favorite interviews from 2025. Just a magnificent thinker and really a moral voice.
And just on that, another person who is not she's not crazy. She's living out her understanding of the gospel. And I think that is like what we're seeing in religious communities across Jews living out their faith, Muslims living out their faith, Christians living out their faith from all different traditions, just following the basic mandates of decency in their faith. And that's what we're seeing in the organizing that's happening around the country.
Absolutely. There are a zillion studies that Americans are becoming more secular. Many organized religion sects have lost membership. And yet, the presence of religious figures does something even for the non-religious. There's an inspiration, there's a spiritual reassurance that Americans get, even if they're not Catholic, even if they're not religious. Talk to us a little bit about that effect, that ripple effect that goes out into the secular community.
One of the, as like kind of a Christian minister who's friends with a lot of people who are not religious at all, and also someone who comes from a Jewish background, the Brandeis side of my family,
Yes.
what I have really, but appreciated, but it's also like a challenge is like people are so happy when Christians actually act like people hope Christians will act.
Yes.
I mean, it's like, there was a great, like when there was a march, for DC, like when there was, kind of the DC was occupied and a cathedral or a big church found Methodist rang the bells.
Oh, it was emotional. I was there.
You were
Yes.
there.
Oh,
And I preached that story actually to churches, like, because I remember hearing like you and others saying that was so moving to us. I'm not moved because I'm a Christian who feels like that does. It's because it's a broader sense of there's a big tent here of transcendent support for what we're trying to do. And when Christians show up well, and that's what, like literally, I'm not preaching. I preach to my people and say they're just so hopeful that we'll show up like Christians because people have a real lovely idea of what Christians should do, which is like, be loving and support people who are being marginalized and all these kind of things that actually so many are out there doing. And so I'm very heartened. And by the way, like Interfaith Alliance, we have grown our affiliate, we have affiliates around the country. We've grown by something like 400% in the last year. We are
that's amazing.
it's exploding. The people want to show up. Interfaith Alliance, by the way, is for people who are non-religious as well. As we work with the, American Secular Society, American Atheists, so we really do have a broad tent. But we think it's especially important when Christian nationalists are trying to say we are the real religion of America, for the rest of us to say, no, you aren't. And in fact, what the headline that we get and that we want is religious people oppose Christian nationalism as a betrayal of our faith and as a betrayal of our country. And so every time they try to jam some sort of religion into public schools, we're like, no, that's terrible for our religion and it's terrible for our public schools, and so on. And so we are really showing up, and again, this is people who feel called out of their faith tradition, and I think that many people who show up alongside us are the spiritual but not religious, or people who are just not religious at all. The bigger the better. The party is open. We're all coming from our own faith, our own beliefs. And so I think it's really important right now to imagine the tent as big as it can be and as welcoming, because what we are facing right now, they are so determined and we are meeting that. And so what you're seeing in Minneapolis, for example, is an incredible example of what is possible. And
Absolutely.
I mean, the organizing there and the people coming together and across religious divides, showing up for one another, getting organized, and for the most part remaining peaceful in the face of terrible violence.
Absolutely. This does remind me of the split we saw in the civil rights movement. On one hand, you had white Southern evangelicals to whom Dr. Martin Luther King wrote from the Birmingham jail that he was being told to slow down, to not rock the boat. And on the other hand, there was this enormous collection of faith leaders, Abraham Heschel from Judaism, Northern mainstream Christian sects, mostly white, and of course the great African American faith leaders in the South. Has that divide kind of reappeared again, where you have a really multi-religion force that is trying to move the country in a what they consider to be a faith-based direction, and others that are simply trying to hold on to power?
Mm. Well, I would say what happened before the civil rights movement implicated the civil rights movement because, if we think about the genesis of the Southern Baptist Convention, that was created so that, Baptist ministers could own slaves. That's the genesis of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
At all points in our country, there have been people on different sides of whether it's abolitionist movement or the right of women to vote, which now some of these right-wing Christian groups are saying that was a mistake. I don't know if you've heard all that. That's really
Oh,
fun to
yes. Oh,
listen.
yes.
But the other thing to think about with the civil rights movement, I had a chance to interview Reverend John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, when he was alive, an icon and someone who's just inspired so much in me and in all of us. And he reminded me, he was like, if every church that now is celebrating, including black churches, if every black church that now celebrates the civil rights movement had participated in the civil rights movement, it
Yes.
would have gone a lot faster. Now, I'm not singling out the black church. That includes the moderate white church. That includes all the nice liberals who don't want to get their hands, too messy. And then, of course, this entrenched group who refused any rights to Black Americans to vote and things like that. So, but what I want to emphasize there is that actually it was kind of a small group of people, not small in numbers. There was like, it eventually got to the majority, but it started as a
Yes.
committed group of people who said, no, we're gonna imagine a way forward. We're gonna be inspired. We're gonna show up alongside and let the Black church lead, and we will support that movement. But a lot of people who now are like, well, of course, we're all in. It's like, well, at the time you should have made a choice, and that's one of the things that I'm really talking about when I'm out there giving addresses or sermons. It's like the time is now to make a choice. How are we?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what the civil rights movement did. It cast a vision, not just about like what we're working against, which was they had to do, but also there was a vision of what was possible. And
Yes. Yes.
that's one of the things that religions can offer in a time like this, which it has offered in other authoritarian movements around the world for the last century, is a vision for the future that doesn't view the present moment as inevitable or that there's nothing we can do about it. In fact, with
Absolutely.
religion can cast a vision forward of a time when we can all live together in peace and with love and justice for all. And so I think that's something that, as we think about the civil rights movement, we can also remember that they had a vision for the future that we
Absolutely.
still need to hold on to and put forward in front of us.
Absolutely. The beloved community that
The
Martin Luther
beloved
King spoke
community.
of, that John Lewis spoke of. Absolutely. One of the things that is so critical when you're fighting autocracy is that it moves from a purely partisan political to really a moral movement, a moral cause. And that in itself can be unifying. We say we're so divided, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, but it seems that through faith, through a pure love of humanity, a pure love of the neighbor, that can be a very unifying message for the country, as opposed to a divisive message, which is sometimes what you get from the white Christian nationalists.
Well, it's very this is tricky because right now people are so entrenched. In fact, like there is such a litmus test for what it, in many churches, like at this point, if you if I, I have a real sympathy for kind of moderate white pastors who are like, what's going on with my church? But their church is coming in full on MAGA. And so they're not sure that if they can speak out, they don't know how to speak out. and even about things that sound like, the joke is that if you preach about the Sermon on the Mount, which is where Jesus is like, blessed are, people are like, well, when did you become a Marxist? I mean, so I do think it's very hard. Like, I
Yeah.
understand what you're trying to get at, but right
Yeah.
now people are
It's
so
very hard. So,
they're so politicized. But what I always try to get out there and say is like, actually, when I'm fighting for religious freedom for everyone, I'm actually fighting for yours as well. I want white conservative Christians to feel like they can be themselves in this country, that they can have space to worship, they can have space to live their own life. What I don't want is for them to be able to dictate to the rest of us how we're supposed to live. We should be able to live together. So as much as we can imagine, help cast that vision I was talking about that also includes people who we don't agree with, because that's always going to be the case. But
yes.
imagine a country where we will not agree on everything, but can we agree on these basic principles that we can live together in peace? Can we agree in the basic principles that one religious group does not get to dictate to the rest of us what we should do with our lives or bodies or beliefs? And so I think, that's how I try to do this, but I also just, I would love to think that we could cast that, let's all just be moral. Well, right now, ICE is using Bible verses in their ads. DHS is using Bible. The Department of Labor is using language, one nation, one people, one land. It's directly out of the Third Reich. We have to recognize that there are some things that, like, they're trying to say we are the moral people. And so it what I don't want to do is think like this will be easy because religious folks can cast a and everybody can hop on. They are trying as hard as they can to use religion, to use that kind of language. And my job and the job of many those of us who come out of religious traditions is to say reject that. And
Absolutely.
I am hopeful because we're right. And I'm hopeful because I really believe that there is a movement right now that is not going to give in to this. But this is a very serious time, and people are going to
Absolutely.
figure out how they show up right now fully and come forward. And I appreciate all you're doing to
Thank you. Um, Last question for you. You've been so generous with your time. Um, One looks back in awe at the nonviolent commitment that Dr. King met, and they were met with bombs, dogs, billy clubs, and yet they maintained a discipline and a commitment to nonviolence because they knew that was the only way that was going to work with the American people. Right now, we seem to be teetering. And in Minneapolis, you saw a few episodes and then people seem to pull back from the edge. What can religious leaders do to reinforce the message of nonviolence and to keep from giving the regime a pretext to then crack down even harder on protesters?
Well, one thing that Interfaith Alliance is doing is we've committed to training 100,000 people this year on nonviolence techniques from across the country. So that is, we recognize how important this is. We recognize that religious communities have a special role to play, and we do know that. The nonviolence of the civil rights movement was learned. I mean, again, the Reverend John Lewis, he told me like no one went out on one of those protests without being trained first. And so that's the reason we're taking this so seriously. And, even, I'm going to Minnesota tomorrow, and I've been trained in nonviolence. But one of the things they're saying is that we're going to spend a day on nonviolence before any of you go out into the streets, because even if you've done it before, we're in a siege right now. This is crazy.
Yes.
They're instigating violence against us. How will you react? And how will you access the spiritual reservoir that you have? And this is a spiritual exercise that people of all faiths and beliefs, including non-religious spiritual beliefs, need to access. Is like, how do we find that? Religious communities have a special way to offer that, and to organize trainings, and so that is a priority for us. We're also right now giving out micro grants around the country, Interfaith Alliances, we just decided, let's spend some of our money to help organize nonviolence training and action
Yes,
around the country. And so this is something we are, as an organization, are taking very seriously. And one of the things that I think is, just to underscore what you said, it's not just in America. This is a technique. Nonviolence is something like 4 times as likely to result in the toppling of autocracy than violence. And so
absolutely.
in this country, it's so important that we consistently recognize that value when we show up. And I think it's, you know, I understand this myself because, sometimes you can get so angry that you can
Yes,
feel the violence in your own heart. And I wanted to
absolutely.
acknowledge that. That's a human emotion, and that's the reason you need training. You need to understand discipline, de-escalation, and also community to help you, be accountable. But it's really important. I appreciate you bringing that up because that is a value that we are really trying to put forward. And it's the immediate needs, but also if we look forward towards the midterms, we don't know what will be happening in the midterms. And
Absolutely.
so religious communities need to take seriously their role in protecting democracy. And so we have something called the vote is sacred, and a lot of the work that we're doing around that is imagining how communities can show up to make sure that voting is accessible to everyone, that people feel safe, and people feel able to vote. It may require us to be on the streets, and not in a bad way, in a good way, and to celebrate
Yes,
our democracy, but also insist on our democracy. And so this is again about mobilization, about showing up in a nonviolent way that is for the people, is for our democracy, and is essentially for our neighbors, which is a fundamental idea for all religious traditions.
absolutely. Paul, if people want to join the Interfaith Alliance, either as an individual or they have a congregation, a church, what do they do? How do they do
First
that?
of all, go to interfaithalliance.org. You will be able to. The first thing should do is just sign up for our emails because that will give you all the things we're doing, the actions, the invitations we have. We are constantly, hosting webinars. We've hosted people, webinars about training and nonviolent resistance. We've done a lot of those even in the past week or two. And if you are in a community, an interfaith community, we have interfaith, uh, groups that are already established, but they want to be connected. One of my good friends is her name is Reverend Chloe Breyer. She is the head of the Interfaith Center of New York City. A very, it's been around for a long time, very august. And I said, if you want to be connected with Interfaith Alliance, we would love to be in community with you. And she was like, that's so interesting. And then I told her about this amazing gathering we had in Boise, Idaho, where we also have an Interfaith Alliance. In Idaho, we have two in Idaho, actually. And she was like, I need to know what's going on in Idaho. It's so different. I
Yes,
want to be in community. And so Interfaith Alliance is really about feeling less alone as individuals,
absolutely.
as groups. And so please reach out. You can also reach out to me personally. We'll just use info at interfaithalliance.org to start with. But ask me any questions and find a way to plug in. And again, there's no litmus test around how religious you have to be. We are truly diverse in our religious, but and also geographically. So anywhere you are, we want to be in community with you.
Well, Paula, it's inspiring and exciting talking to you. We want to hear about your trip to Minneapolis, so we'll check back with you after you return. And thank you for all that you are doing. It is, of course, critical work. And we can't have, I think, a democratic resistance without awakening a spiritual and moral sense of outrage to what is going on. So thank you for all you are doing, and thank you for making such time. Be safe in Minnesota, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you so much, Jen. I appreciate being here.